Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Thursday, May 27th. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Minnesota game is in 98 days. The game against Michigan in 184 days. Our season preview series continues today with the final Big Ten teams who the Buckeyes aren't scheduled to play, the Wisconsin Badgers. While they're not on the regular season schedule, it always seems like it's basically 50-50 that they might play in Indianapolis in December, so they may be on the schedule a little later on this year. My guest today is Colten Bartholomew. He was the Badgers beat writer for Madison.com, the Wisconsin State Journal, also the host of the Red Zone podcast. He also just got home from his honeymoon. So, Colten, first, congratulations on that. And also, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
So, I had this conversation about Iowa a couple weeks ago, but it feels like you just kind of like find and replace Iowa with Wisconsin in it. Like, Wisconsin is one of those teams where it just feels like they have their identity. Sometimes they have slightly better players to execute that, and they go to the Rose Bowl. Sometimes the talent isn't quite there, and then they go to the Outback Bowl. But it's just like one of the most consistent teams in identity and performance in the league, maybe the nation. I mean, is that a fair characterization?
It is, and I think it's intentional because I think they know that if they go out there and you could go back to the Gary Anderson years and when they were trying to out recruit Iowa or Ohio State or Michigan, trying to go in on every 5-star and kind of not wasting their time. They can land some of those guys, but when you're not really focusing on the guys that you can get and are going to be successful here, that 3 to 4 year plan with all these guys that Wisconsin's known for. That's when they start slipping off, record wise and recruiting wise. And I think Paul Chryst is really in tune with what this place is and what they're good at, and just really leans into it. And I think it's something that a lot of programs could probably do a better job of doing. And there's only 5 or 6 Ohio States, Alabama's, Clemson's. There's only a couple of those teams. You got to find who you are, and I think that's what Wisconsin does every year. Is they lock into who they are and continue to, like you said, try to get some better players for maybe some of those premier spots like a running back or quarterback, but otherwise just continue to build off the lines and then do what you can. So,
yeah, and it seems like they may have one of their premier players at quarterback this year in Graham Mertz. He is not just the typical kind of game manager quarterback that most people probably associate with a Badger quarterback, lots of checkdowns, lots of handing off and screens and that kind of stuff. He was something that Ryan Day and the Ohio State staff really, really liked coming out of high school. They wanted him a lot, and Wisconsin got him. He was also someone who maybe was like, this was a spring where he had an opportunity to really take a step forward and kind of go from, okay, he was a little inconsistent last year to, take that next step. So what did you see from him this spring? And, is he ready to kind of move his game to the next level?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that came out of this spring for Graham Mertz is the confidence, even after the struggles that he had. Because I think you talk to him throughout the year and just the grind of last season with the COVID and, guys being in and out of the lineup and just the inconsistencies throughout the whole team really kind of weighed on him because he knew that he wasn't playing well. And, it's kind of typical of any young guy in college that was a stud in high school. It's probably the first time they really struggled in their athletic life. And I think he really pushed through that well. And the big thing that I saw this spring was just the desire to and ability to take chances down the field. And that's something that's always been an issue for Wisconsin, is not having that guy at quarterback that, has either the arm strength, the arm talent, or just the kind of the mentality of taking some chances and challenging defenses in that way. And Graham Mertz has that. And one of the things that you'll find as you're around him enough, like he's always positive, and you can't tell sometimes if it's just a quarterback facade or if that's really him, but I think it is really who he is, and it comes through in his play. I think as long as he can stay healthy this year, he's going to be that guy that can challenge defenses vertically and then make the smarter throws in those intermediate areas where, as you mentioned, Wisconsin's always going to be built on running the ball and leaning on the offensive line, doing play action. But, there are going to be times against the better teams where it's 3rd and 7 and the quarterback's got to make the throws. And I think Graham Mertz can do that. We saw it at times last year, and then we saw other times where he would press and, lose his footwork and things of that nature. So I think having that year under his belt now and then having this full off season in the spring to really focus on those things is going to help a lot. And the return of the talent around him, I know we'll get to in a second, but the guys that he has around him, really finally building the chemistry with them. You look back last season, didn't have a normal off season, wasn't going to be the starter coming into last season. Jack Cohn gets hurt. He gets thrown in there, and he gets just a couple of basically practice weeks, no extra time to get ready and try to get a rapport with these guys. So I think this season he's going to have everything kind of set up for him to be the starter, and he knows that, and it's going to help a lot.
In preparation for the show, I was reading through your coverage from the spring, and there was an article that talked about how the passing game could be explosive if their wide receivers can stay healthy this year. And it was just kind of like, I can't remember a Wisconsin passing game I would ever consider explosive at any point in the past. So, Ohio State fans probably remember Danny Davis. He's a Springfield, Ohio native. But I mean, they've got Kendrick Pryor, they got Jake Ferguson. So is this a year when the passing game maybe makes them more of a multi-dimensional threat and, maybe fills that, answers some of those last few questions they need to kind of take that leap from very good Big Ten team to, a level beyond that?
I think so. And I think because of the depth that they have, you mentioned the top three guys, Davis, Pryor, and Ferguson. I think Ferguson's going to be one of the top 2 or 3 tight ends in the conference again. If Danny Davis is able to stay on the field, you saw it even in the Illinois game. He's a downfield threat, and he's tough to cover when he gets down there. I think the thing that they have, though, is behind those guys. You look at Chimere DK, came in last season as a freshman, made some big plays, had some inconsistencies, but overall made some steps this spring to continue showing that he can be a big play threat. I think another name to put out there is Devin Chandler. He got some run as a returner and a little bit as a receiver later on in the year when they had some of these injury issues. But his explosiveness, he's just one of those guys that when he gets the ball, there is no hesitation. He's just going upfield and he's going to make some moves and make things happen. He's not the type of athlete or receiver that we're used to at Wisconsin. He's got the extra burst. But I think he's a guy that could be another big playmaker for them. And then they're pretty high on these 2 freshman receivers. They got one out of Ohio as well, Marcus Allen. So they're really high on him. They think that he can come in and make an immediate contribution. So I think that just the depth that they have at receiver and the different athlete that they have than typically in the past is going to help them a lot in the passing game.
The offensive line is another one of those things that it's like, yep, this is the same thing every year. It is, during a bad year, it's a B+, and during a good year, it's an A- or an A, and that's just what it is. It seems like, though, they have been slowly bringing in even better talent recently. Like they always kind of did the 3-star who hung around for 5 years, and then the last 2 years was, they just 5 guys who were all 330 pounds right across the deck, and they were all 4th and 5th year players, and it was consistent. And, the talent is getting a little better, and this year they have 4 redshirt seniors among the guys projected to start. So, this all just seems like it's adding up to another really big year for the Wisconsin offensive line. And, you can talk about that. And now you can also talk about who is the next great Wisconsin running back who's coming off that assembly line, who's going to get to run behind those guys.
Sure. So with the offensive line, I think that's actually going to be one of the more fun competitions this season because they moved Logan Bruss back to tackle here in the spring after playing guard in 2020. And I think tackle is his more natural position, that right tackle spot for him. And him coming back, he had a chance, I think, to go to the pros last season and get drafted late if he wanted to. But him moving back to tackle is going to help a lot on that right side. That seemed to be one of the areas that they weren't as good at protecting last year off that right side. But I think one of the great competitions they're going to have is at that left tackle spot. You mentioned most redshirt seniors are projected to start, but Logan Brown is a guy who was a 5-star recruit a couple of years ago, redshirt sophomore season coming up for him. When his best plays, he looks like, Joe Thomas, All-American level, just dominating people. But then he has 2 or 3 plays later where he just gets beat, and you're like, what happened to the guy a couple of plays ago? So it's one of those situations where if he gets more consistent and kind of evens those things out, he becomes, a top-tier starter for them, and then they have even more depth across the line. So I think this year, especially with the fact that Joe Rudolph is going to be able to focus pretty much solely on the offensive line again after taking over play calling last season, it's going to be huge. Just having a guy that experienced and has coached so many good players here, running that offensive line, kind of getting that, like you mentioned, just kind of back to that assembly line type of scenario. But I think when you look at the running back spot too, Jalen Berger is a guy that really emerged last season for him as their best option. He mixed well with Garrett Groshek in the backfield. And then the tough thing is now you think you know what you have in Jalen Berger, but they don't have a ton of depth behind him that's experienced. They lost Nakia Watson to a transfer. Garrett Groshek went to the NFL. Here in the spring, a bunch of their running backs got hurt. They were down to a walk-on and a converted linebacker playing running back for him and a bunch of fullbacks. So it was kind of an ugly spring for the backfield. So I think that's going to be one of those spots that we haven't seen Jalen Berger with a 20, 25 carry workload every game, that Jonathan Taylor style where you know what you're going to get from him every snap. Maybe he can be that way, but I think they're going to need some help there. There's word that Ches Maluzzi, the transfer from Clemson, is highly interested in Wisconsin. Wisconsin's interested in him. So I think that's an option for him. The big question is just who's going to be tag teaming with Jalen Berger, because I think he's going to be more effective in 15 to 20 carries and then 5 to 6 catches a game, as opposed to just pounding him in between the tackles every play.
Well, you mentioned the change earlier with the play calling. Paul Chryst now going to be calling the plays again on offense. Is that something that going to make a big difference? How is that going to make the Wisconsin offense either better or at least different this year?
Yeah, I think first you just talk about the experience. Paul Chryst is just a very good play caller and a really good game planner. I think that's one of the things that when you talk about why Wisconsin's so consistent is that they are really good at coming into each game with this idea of what they want to do and the counters if a play doesn't work and things of that nature. And I think they lost that a little bit last season, and partially because of the play calling, partially because of the lineup changes seemingly every week. But having Paul Chryst as the quarterback coach and the play caller now, everything's kind of on him and Graham Mertz together, working the offense and making sure that the offense is in a good position. And when you look at throughout Paul Chryst's career, anytime that he's had a quarterback start back-to-back seasons for him, or at least the majority of those seasons, the quarterback's touchdown interception ratio has gone up, completion percentage has gone up, and passing yards per game has gone up. So it's a proven thing in Paul Chryst's career that if he has a guy that's got experience under center, he's going to get better. So I think that's one of those situations where it's all going to work out kind of. It's unfair to say that a team's destiny all rides on one player, but I really do believe that if Graham Mertz is good and with Paul Chryst calling the plays, that he's got a much better chance of being successful. It's all kind of rides on Graham Mertz for this team, what it's going to be.
Similar to the running back situation where you mentioned they lost pretty much everyone and we're down to a few spare guys here and there. It sounds like that was kind of the case with the defensive line this spring as well, where a lot of guys were sitting out this spring. Was that like a precautionary thing, or is that depth maybe going to be a concern going into the fall?
I think it's a precautionary thing, especially when you look at the nose tackle spot, and that seemed to create the most issues because they don't have a ton of depth there anyway. They only have a couple of guys that are true nose tackles in Keanu Benton and Bryson Williams. Both of them have been banged up throughout the seasons and needed some more maintenance than other players on the defensive line, especially Williams coming off a couple of knee surgeries a couple of years ago. So I think that was more preventative, and they know what they're going to get from those guys and didn't want to push them too hard if they were banged up in the spring. But I think the encouraging thing for the defensive line was seeing guys like Rodas Johnson, Matt Henningsen coming back from an injury, Gio Paez coming in playing well as well, Isaiah Mullins taking over another defensive end spot. Just having some more depth on that defensive line, even though they're having to play some funky positions and move in and out of spots that they're not always going to be in the season, just getting them more reps, and that group is going to be a lot more deep than the last couple of years where it's been all Garrett Rand and Isaiah Loudermilk. And I think that it's going to help in the long run. It wasn't, like you mentioned, it wasn't pretty in the spring, but I think in the long run, those guys getting those reps are going to help a lot this fall.
What about the back seven on defense? I mean, just looking through, it seems like they're fairly set at safety. They kind of know what they have there. Top two at corner are pretty set as well. I mean, this seems like it should just be like a very solid defense pretty much all around.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the big thing is that Jim Leonard, the defensive coordinator here at Wisconsin, isn't coaching the entire secondary anymore. They brought in Hank Poteet this offseason to coach the cornerbacks. And we saw throughout spring just the evolution of these corners, not just, being as physical as they've been. That's kind of been their hallmark since Jim Leonard's been here, being very physical on the outside, but a lot better in press and not having to be as physical down the field because they won at the line of scrimmage. And that's something that I think they've been missing the last couple of years. And in the games against the better opponents that they've lost to, that's been their issue, is that they're not winning at the line of scrimmage. So then they're getting beat deep down the field. I think that's helped a lot. And then the fact that this linebacker crew, you look at Leo Chanel and Jack Sanborn, two of the more experienced. I would say you're going to be hard pressed to find two better linebackers on the same team in the Big Ten this year than those two guys on the inside. So what they can do as pass rushers, tackling obviously running backs and everything like that coming out of the backfield. And then both of them said that their big goal in the spring was to improve as their pass coverage. So I think that this defense has a chance to be really special, especially if somebody on the outside linebacker group can emerge and become a little bit better more consistent, I should say, of a pass rusher, that they don't always have to blitz to create that pressure because, when you get against the better teams, you can't always do that. But I'm very confident in this defense. And I think one guy to mention when you talk about the safeties is Hunter Wohler, who's the Gatorade State Player of the Year here in Wisconsin, coming in as a freshman. I don't know if it's fair to say I think he's going to play right away, but I think he's got a very good chance just because of his athleticism and his feel for football. And the way that the coaches and people around this program talk about him is that they're going to try to find a way to give him chances, at least here in the fall, to earn a rep or earn a spot on the defense. So I think it's a lot of exciting things happening on that side of the ball.
The schedule this fall starts off with a really big one. I mean, Ohio State has their big game week 2 against Oregon at home. No messing around, no opening act for Wisconsin. Week 1, Penn State visits Camp Randall. First of all, it sounds like they're probably on track, probably not official yet, probably to have a full crowd. That is a stadium that gets raucous without much prompting. I'm sure the first time with a full house against Penn State, potentially prime time, if that is how that shakes out. Man, that is going to be quite an atmosphere. And then they have a gimme against Eastern Michigan. Then they play Notre Dame at Soldier Field on September 25th. Then they have Michigan at home the following week. So how likely is it to you that they make it out of that Michigan game at 3-1 or maybe even 4-0?
It's going to depend on what the quarterback situation looks like after the fall. But if they're healthy, I really think because those games are at home, that Penn State and that Michigan game are at home, I think they've got a really good chance of being at least 3-1 because I just like everything they have on this team and the amount of experience they have. It's very reminiscent to me of that 2019 team that went to the Rose Bowl because they come off that 2018 season. They're really disappointed in themselves. They don't feel like they played well. They work really hard that offseason. They come in, they're good from the jump in 2019. The only Big Ten losses they had that year were 2 to Ohio State. Those are respectable. Oh, excuse me, they had a loss to Illinois game. I shouldn't have said that. But anyway, but I kind of feel the same vibe from this team here in the spring because 2020 was a disaster for them. Nothing really went right outside of beating Minnesota and winning the bowl game. So I think they've used that as motivation this offseason. And you look around, they've got the experience at all these key important positions. So I've got a lot of vibes of that 2019 season again, where everything's kind of on the upswing for them and they're going to be able to have some big wins. And then I think catching Penn State early, especially with them being in the same situation, coming off a tough year and having some transitions, I think that's going to help them. I think Penn State's going to be a much better team in November, December than they are right away. So I think that's a big advantage for Wisconsin. And then for whatever reason, it seems like Wisconsin has Michigan's number in the last couple of years. The lopsided scores are just crazy when you look at the history of this rivalry. So I think that's something too. That Notre Dame game is going to be the nuts one because you talk about possibly Jack Cohn getting his revenge game against Wisconsin at Soldier Field. It's going to be insane because how many Notre Dame fans live in Chicago. I think that's the one that if they're not 4-0, I think that's the one they might trip up in. But I've got a lot of confidence that they're going to have a good opening to the season.
Well, they made the terrible mistake of scheduling Army out of conference. You should never schedule a service academy out of conference. You don't need to do that to yourselves. But the Big Ten road schedule is about as soft as you could reasonably expect in any given year. They go to Illinois, Purdue, Rutgers, and Minnesota. And, I probably don't need to tell an audience full of Ohio State fans that games at Purdue are not a gimme win. But, it seems like this is setting up for them to at least get back to Indianapolis, to be the strong favorites to get back to Indianapolis. So is this the year that they finally break through and win that Big Ten title for the first time since 2012?
I don't know, man. I feel the same way. I think Wisconsin's the heavy favorite in the West, and then obviously I think Ohio State's the heavy favorite in the East. I'm not going to predict Wisconsin to beat Ohio State until I see it, but it's going to happen. For me, it's going to happen the next couple of years, just because of the Ohio State transitioning. When you go from Justin Fields at quarterback to somebody new, it doesn't matter how good this recruit. I know they've got a couple of guys that are competing for that job at Ohio State, but I know they're both look like they're going to be awesome. They just haven't done it yet. I just think that if Wisconsin's going to be able to beat Ohio State, it's got to be this year or next year because of the experience factor that Wisconsin's going to have on their side versus Ohio State. But like I said, I'm not predicting that until I see it.
And I'm gonna solve your Michigan mystery for you. Ready? Go back and look at their defensive tackle depth charts the last few years, and that's the answer as to why Wisconsin has completely demolished them the last few years.
That's a fair point.
Let people know where they can find you on Twitter, where they can read your work, and where they can find the Red Zone podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find Red Zone anywhere on the podcast, Spotify, Apple. It's got a fierce badger cartoon biting a football. You can find it that way. Madison.com. We got a ton of great deals for subscriptions and Badger exclusive subscriptions as well. And then Twitter, CBartWSJ. Again, that's CBartWSJ on Twitter.
All right. Well, Colten, I really appreciate you taking the time to join me. And I have a feeling I might get to see you in Indianapolis in a few months.
I hope so. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks again to Colten for taking the time to run through the Badgers. Again, this is a team that's not an Ohio State schedule yet, but there's a pretty decent chance Ohio State will see them in Indianapolis in December. That is always a decent possibility. So make sure you check out all of his work, and also make sure you check out BuckeyeScoop.com. We have a fantastic website full of great stuff, a fantastic team of insiders, a wonderful and active and vibrant and fun community on our Ask the Insiders board. It is going to be a crazy month coming up with visits and all that kind of stuff. You need a team of insiders that can tell you exactly what's going on with all the visits, all the commitments, all the decommitments, all the flips, all the transfers. There is insanity coming, and you can stay up on everything at BuckeyeScoop.com. Also, make sure you check out all of our great podcasts. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Spotify, you name it, we're there. Just search Buckeye Scoop. You can subscribe right there, and so you never miss an episode. And also leave us a 5-star rating and review. We really do appreciate that. That helps other folks find those shows as well. And finally, youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. We put all our shows up there, all of our podcasts. If you prefer to throw the podcast up on TV in the morning while you're getting breakfast ready or something, great. That's fine. It's nice and easy. Just subscribe at youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop, and you'll get all that stuff delivered right to you. And you also can check out player interviews, highlights from camps, coach interviews. We do a little bit of everything. We stream stuff live. We do live pre and post game shows for football games. It's all there. youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. Just hit that subscribe button and you get notified every time we post a new video. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We will talk to you tomorrow.